Welcome everyone to another Mere Mortals conversation. Today I have Alexander Watanabe. He is an artist, coder, creator of Unsigned Algorithms. We'll get into that in a little bit. Architect, and honestly, I just find you super fascinating, man. So welcome to the Mere Mortals.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, man. So I always start off with, I guess it's like a more a personal question for me. It's like if I never speak to this person again, if like, you know, the world ends in 10 minutes, I wish I would have asked this one. So I've noticed you have a really amazing ability to bring in, I'd say, just cultural references. So it's sort of things that can be really well known and then also really niche. And there's usually for like analogies and concept explanations and things like that. Do you particularly work on that? Or is that sort of just a byproduct of, I guess, like your day-to-day consumption of things?
I have the like world's most useless undergraduate degree. It is like I was an undergrad in the first year. We were like, when do we pick our majors? And they're like, no. You have a liberal arts degree. Like it is a degree with the like the what do you call it? The focus is the liberal arts. And so there was no major. It was just like a broad study of anything. And so I took a little bit of economics. I took a little bit of, ended up turning it into like a faux literature degree. So I read a lot of like American and Japanese literature, like World War II kind of stuff. But yeah, we sampled a lot of different things and I just like to read. I think Wikipedia was coming out or was kind of popular by the time I was an undergrad. And I spent many a night just like, open new tab and tab browsing. The combination of Wikipedia and tab browsing came out at the same time. So I would just have like, 50 tabs open and I would try to like read all the tabs by the time, I passed out at my desk kind of thing. So I don't think I focus on it, but I have just as thanks to that kind of really useless degree, I think I read a lot of stuff and had a lot of time back when I was an undergrad. So
yeah, nice, man. Nice. Well,
thank you
I
for
have
that.
noticed
That's like the best compliment I've ever received. It's like,
oh man, my pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah, well, I noticed like you were quoting Yukio Mishima once, and I've read a couple of his books, which
I love Mishima.
Yeah, he's a fascinating dude. Just not only the stuff that he wrote, but the way he lived his life and like the way his life ended as well.
Yeah,
wow.
Can you give I'm so excited someone else knows Mishima because I always gonna push him on people, but he's probably like the most influential thinker in my undergraduate days. Like the whole idea, and it was funny. I was introduced to him by this kind of Cambridge professor who was like very atrophied in his body, like never took care of it at all. And he was explaining, this kind of homoerotic bodybuilder who killed himself in like a dramatic coup attempt at the Pentagon of Japan that he knew would fail. Right? What was this kind of thing? And but what's your kind of take or read on Mishima and what interests you about him?
So I keep so I have like a little book reviews channel as well.
Yeah.
Not particularly little. It's actually bigger than this one in terms of subscribers and stuff. And I've got my book here with all of my like the notes that I take for it. So I'm really trying to find the one that I did on Mishima because there was I think two. Oh God, what's his most popular books, man? I've forgotten the name of it.
Sun and Steel. There's the Runaway Horse kind of tetralogy that he ended his life with. The 4 books at the end. And
it was something. It was like the Sailor and
the Sound of the Sea or something. The Sound of Waves might be one of them. And the Temple of the Golden Pavilion is probably one of the more famous ones.
Yeah, I've been meaning. I've been meaning to get that one. Let me just look it up quickly because it'll annoy the hell out of me that I don't know it. But yeah, what I really liked about him was the here we go. The Sailor Who Fell from the Sea with Grace, of course. Yeah, that's the one I was thinking about. But you were The Sound of Waves was also another one.
Yeah,
that you mentioned.
I named my son after a character in The Sound of Waves. So
nice, man, nice. That's super cool. Yeah. So in terms of the impression I got, I love the. So in particular, the sailor who fell from grace with the sea. So that book was about it was sort of like a kid idealizing this man this sailor, and he idealized this hardworking this guy who would like venture out onto the seas, come back. And this sailor like basically falls in love with his wife, with the son's mother, and then he sort of like starts to see, I guess, the corrosive effect of becoming domesticated in a sense. So like he starts wearing the wife, like what the wife asks him to, and things like that. So it's like that idealism of a young boy, the passion, and how it can get distorted, because the ending of that gets really weird, where he gets little bit sadistic, finds a cat, does some pretty fucked up things to the cat.
Most of his stuff have these kind of like I forget which book it's from, but there's like the some kind of painting like the suffering of Christ or some other kind of Christian saint figure, and he gets very fixated on like the stab wounds of the thing. He has like basically like a very strong obsession with death, and he manifests that in real life in how he kills himself, right, or has someone kill him for him. But yeah, I for me, like I always had the question in undergrad, like, do I live my life as a piece of art, or do I put my energy and passion into my work trying to make art? And he kind of did both, I think. Like, to live a beautiful life or to live a great life is kind of maybe the ultimate kind of achievement. And so for those who aren't familiar, Mishima is like a very controversial figure in Japanese kind of history, not just in literature. Like, he's a kind of mainstream figure because he was hated by the left and the right, because he kind of like said the emperor should apologize to the Japanese people for World War II. So that made him hated on the right. But he was also like very, I would say, not nationalistic, but like very kind of patriotic and focused on Japan, which
very pro-Japanese.
Made him really not really well liked on the left. And so I kind of like these people who aren't liked by either side, because I think they're kind of just like truth sayers, right? And they're not centrist. Like there's like a boring, banal, vanilla centrist position, which is like, let's not offend anyone. Let's try to like. He's like, no, fuck you and fuck you. You're like,
he was all over, and it wasn't just for the sake of it as well.
Yeah.
It wasn't. You could point out of probably some people nowadays where it's like, oh yeah, they're
just pot stirrers kind of thing, right? They get off on trolling or whatever kind of thing.
But you look at the way that he lived, and he took it to the extreme. Like, everything was done to the extreme. The physical nature of, like you mentioned, like the bodybuilding sort of perfection of the body, the passion. He was just a fascinating guy. It's one of those guys who you'd really love. Like, man, I wish there was some recordings, written interviews.
There's a new Netflix show about him interviewing, or a documentary, like a live recording of him debating some Japanese students, but it's only in Japanese from what I've seen. I don't know even know if it's outside of Japan, and I don't know that it has subtitles, but I'm sure it will eventually be subtitled. And it's during like the kind of, I think it's the 60s, these like student protests era of like, so it's him debating a bunch of like communist student groups who are like very upset with him in this auditorium. It looks like so awesome. I want to see this. But what is it?
Hell yeah, I'll have to keep a lookout for that. But what other sort of Japanese book authors would you recommend? The only one I really know other is Haruki Murakami.
Murakami is pretty cool. He's kind of crazy. I fell off of his stuff after Wind Up Bird Chronicle. Like, I don't think I read 19Q4 and on.
Yeah, I tried that one. It was okay.
I think Norwegian Wood is good to start out with from him, and Pinball, which I think is his first book. Like, I kind of lost after you've read a couple Murakami's. They kind of all kind of blur together. There's like some Talking Sheep and some like undercooked pasta or overcooked pasta, and a lot of Beatles references, and it's all a blur. But my second favorite or first favorite is a guy called Dazai Osamu, or Osamu Dazai, first name, last name.
Yeah.
And he has, I think my favorite book of all time is No Longer Human, or Ningen Shikaku. It's like it's kind of a play on an angel. Angels are not human, and like there's this artist. It's kind of like an autobiography. The dude tries to kill himself like 5 times, and he's unsuccessful a lot. This is not a spoiler. It's like literature is not about like what happens in the plot, right? It's about like the kind of the journey, or connecting the thing together. But like he just take out one example, like he tries to kill himself with his lover, and his lover succeeds and he doesn't. And like just everything goes wrong for him, right? And it's kind of like this. He's kind of in a way like not meant for this world, right? Like this world is such a kind of like dirty and whatever place, and I wouldn't say bad, but just banal again, right? Like this kind of everyday, unartistic kind of thing. And so I don't know if I haven't read it in a long time, but maybe I would just look at it a bit differently. But back then, when like I was really consumed with trying to create art and live this kind of life, it was a very compelling narrative for me.
Yeah. Did you read it in Japanese or in English?
I read most of this. I've only read like the only Japanese author I've read in Japanese is Mishima, and that was like 2 books. That was a shorter one, the Sound of Waves. But when I was in my 20s and undergrad, I didn't speak Japanese. I was
okay. So you've learned it afterwards,
yeah. And so
gotcha.
And
you do
then,
have Japanese heritage, but you didn't learn it growing up.
I have a father, so the Japanese saying is furo meshi neru, means bath, food, sleep. Like this is the typical Japanese father, and go to golf on the weekends, right? Like the Japanese fathers are just like not involved in their kids' lives. And my parents were divorced, and also unlike most Japanese halfies, I have a Japanese father, so I learned there's a reason they call it a mother tongue, right? Like you primarily interact with your mother, I think, growing up. And so I picked up English because my mom's American, and
okay, interesting. Yeah, so I'm sort of similar in a way. Like I'm as plain as you can be, like Aussie as no super interesting heritage.
You're a really weird Aussie. I've never met like such an intellectual Aussie before, so I'm really perplexed.
Okay, man. Like you only need to go check out like the Hosky episode I did or something like that. Then you can see the idiocy coming in.
I like the thing I like about Australia is like self-deprecating humor. I think that's a very valuable thing to have. Like some people get really confused by me when I'm like, oh, you really fucked me hard, like, thank you so much. Like, and they're like, what? Like, they give me these like very weird gifts. Like, how can you talk about yourself like that? But I think it's just like the best way to slash your opponent's tires is to slash your tires before they can. Right? So. For
sure. It's funny you mentioned that because I've been doing a little bit of introspection the past couple of days, and I've always had like a little bit of a I'm uncomfortable with compliments in many ways. So someone once told me it was actually
all good people are.
Thank you. I was in of all places, I was in a strip club with my co-host Juan on like a Thursday evening or something.
I'm so insulted.
It'll come, man. We got tons to go through. And he was like, we were talking something like that, and he was just like, you don't know how to take a compliment. And I think that's pretty true, man. I really suck at I feel like I don't know, even just knowing how to respond to them sometimes, I'm just like, I say thank you, but
I think it's a very manly thing, right? To take a compliment well. And I'd like to get better at it as well. I've received a lot of compliments the past year or two, and like I feel like, yeah, it's kind of like a really unsatisfying thing to get like flustered and awkward. Like I think, like take a moment, compose yourself, and lower the register half an octave or an octave. Thank you. Right? Like because like I think it is really a cop out to say, oh, I got lucky, or like, oh, that's undeserved. Like, like it's, you should just accept it and not dismiss it, because I think the person giving you the compliment, if it is an actual compliment, kind of would like it to be acknowledged in a way. Right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
they've prepared this thing, like someone who made you a pie or something. They've delivered it to you. It's incumbent on you to sample it and express appreciation for it, right? And so the kind of typical, oh, I'm not sure, no, it's like you've kind of like foul balled the compliment, right? Like I think your job when you receive a compliment is to hit a six or a home run or whatever kind of thing, right? Depending
Yeah,
on
100%. It's like a golden opportunity, and like 90% of the work's been done for you in a way, but you stumble at the line and you fuck it up. Yeah. No, that's now that you bring it up, it's like, damn, I should probably spend some more time thinking about this.
I'm sure there's some like Sigma Alpha male course or whatever, that teaches you how to take a compliment and how to be a based compliment receiver, establish eye contact and don't break it. And
go on the Sigma grind sets on YouTube that.
I love
solve
that
all your
contract.
problems.
I love that song that plays in the background of all the Thomas Shelby clips.
Yeah. Or what is it? The Breaking Bad. One of my favorite ones was what was it? It was like your kid. If your kid gets insulted, like because they're handicapped or something, like make the other person handicapped. It's just him beating the shit out of some kids
in the story.
Beautiful, man. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Well, look, you were talking about art a bit, and I remember you saying once that you wanted to be a writer when you were young, but I'm not sure. You said, I think it was like there was no option for it at that time. How do you feel about that now that you've sort of, I guess, like progressed to a different stage of your life? And
I think if I wanted to, I could do that. In some ways, I feel like nobody reads anymore, and so what's the point of writing to a certain extent, right? Like I left architecture because I felt like even if I were to design a great building, like what's the foot traffic? Like maybe 1 million people a year or something like that. And I want to have a larger impact on society than, 1 million people thinking, oh, what a great building this architect has designed. Like it's just not in the domain of something which can be kind of impactful in a cultural sense. And I think writing still has, is like the highest art form, I think. It's just amazing to me that, like with a pencil and paper and like there's no kind of equipment concerns, like a good camera or microphone or, like making a movie, right? Like all this other externalities. Like if you don't produce a compelling text as a writer, like who do you have to blame but yourself, right? There's no tool that you can pass the blame off to, and it's a poor worksman who blames his tools kind of thing. And so that's why I think it is such like a pure kind of or highest art form. And but it is like you want to find an audience of people who can be affected by and receive your work. And I think to a certain extent if you write a great book, like you're talking to the converted, right? Like the number of people who actually read a book nowadays is so diminishingly small that those people probably don't even need the book. Do you know what I mean? Like, because there are so many great books that adding another one to the thing is like, okay, great. Like this was a problem in my in undergrad. It's like, I think it was Rainer Marie Rilke or somebody had this idea like the world doesn't need another love poem. And of course he went on to like be a poet and write a bunch of love poems, but like that kind of acknowledgement that like we'll be okay without more of it, at least in the short term. My opinion of why people should make art is that like it's kind of like a reservoir, and evaporation takes over, things get lost and forgotten, and so you kind of have to replenish the reservoir, right, over time. And if not, then eventually you're left with no art or no impactful things to kind of talk to people across space and time. But like on an individual level, you don't need to. Like the world will be all right, kind of thing. And so why it's interesting to me about like NFTs and this kind of stuff is like there's a kind of moment and an opportunity to have such a wider impact and to like put some kind of meaningful work in front of a much larger audience, that is kind of exciting to me, right? Like we've kind of hijacked this whole like monkey ape conversation. Not that we've really hijacked it, because it's a very, very small piece of the monkey ape conversation, right?
Yeah.
But it's a chance. Like there have been more than a handful of people who came into the project and started talking to me like, I had no clue about art. I didn't care about art. And like this has kind of opened my eyes, and it's kind of like a guerrilla backdoor sneak attack to like inject them with some not HIV, but
yeah. You're letting down the analogies there. We'll bring it back up.
I was thinking about those like theater, urban rumor kind of things, like, oh, I went to the theater and I sat on a needle and I got infected, kind of thing. That was
yeah. Well, you can include me in that list pretty much because so like my background is I'd say like I've got an engineering degree. I wouldn't call myself an engineer because I haven't done that for 6-ish years now, and but that's pretty much how my mind works. Like maths and physics. That's easy for me. I sort of skated through high school because all I had to do was math B, math C, physics, chemistry. And then like English, and I got by in English, and then everything else just boosted me up. And struggled to appreciate art in the sense that like it didn't speak to me. Like I wouldn't particularly go to museums, online stuff, even painting myself or drawing. Like just none of it particularly interests me. And music to a certain extent as well. I enjoy it, but I wouldn't get deep into it. Sort of like background thing, chuck it on and leave it. And it's probably only been in the past year or two where I've had more of an interest in these sorts of things, and it's sort of just been cropping up into my life. And I became interested in, I suppose, blockchains and crypto, and just use that term as generally as you want. And I came across your stuff somehow. This is the Unsigned Algorithms, and like it's one of those ones where I can't explain. I can't explain why I liked it in the first place. I can't explain why I joined the Discord. I can't explain why when I went through like a periodic just deleting of Discords that I joined, yours would be one of the only ones that would stay. And
probably because it doesn't bother you. It's like it's a very weird Discord, but it continue.
Well, I think that's actually why I enjoy it, man, because there's like a DAO in there, and there's just general stuff, and then there's not V2, and then like there's just people talking about random stuff, and then people talking about the actual unsigned algorithms themselves, and maybe it's just the way people were talking, and anyway, it was sort of like. Your project succeeded, had an imprint on me because of almost like the simplicity, but then the I guess like the beauty behind the what's going on. So just because I'm talking about it and everyone who's listening has no idea, could you just explain what the unsigned algorithms are? And I'll chuck up like a photo or a picture or two while you're talking. So
I kind of really came into NFTs. Via Space Buds and Alessandro's work, if anyone is familiar with these little, like profile picture things. And I thought it was whatever. It was. I like what he did by allowing it to occur on Cardano, but I didn't really get what an NFT was. And I always use this line. Sorry for repeating it, but like, why would anyone buy a link to a JPEG? Right? Like that's kind of a crazy thing to do. And so. Because an NFT, for those who aren't initiated, like it's not the thing; it's a receipt, right? This is what all the mainstream fudders and other people talk about NFTs. I kind of think of it as like if you've ever bought a car or a house, you have a title to the car or the house, right? That says, "Hey, that house over there, or that car with that VIN number, that's mine," right? And the registry is the government you go to the DMV or whatever, you submit like update records, like sold this car to Bob and now it's his car kind of thing. Are you tracking me here, right? The whole kind of analogy. That's what an NFT does for free, right? Like it's that title that moves around. But I thought like as a designer, as an architect, there's this idea of material honesty, of like doing things that, from a structural engineer point of view, you could say like, do you know what reinforced concrete is?
I'd know of it. I wouldn't be able to describe it.
So if you've ever seen like concrete, yeah, exactly. Rebar, steel rods are placed inside the concrete because the Portland cement, like the crushed stone, is very good in compression. Right, like if you try to crush it, like you're not going to be crushing that, bro. You need like a hydraulic press to do that, right? But in tension, Portland cement is horrible, right? Like it's like sand, right? You can pull it apart, like Captain America breaking a log on his chest, kind of thing, right? If you've ever seen that GIF, because it's just there's nothing binding it together. So what reinforced concrete is it's these steel joining rods, like a cage placed inside. Suspended inside the structure of the Portland cement, and then you have a very good composite material. The cement takes the compression, the steel, the very thin, relatively speaking, steel takes the tensile load, the tension of the pulling apart. And it's like you get these phrases like you can't push a rope, right? But you can support a bridge and thousands of cars using rope, right? Like rope cannot take a compressive force, but it can take a tensile load. And so the idea from architecture is like use your materials in ways that celebrate or take advantage of their intrinsic properties. And so when I was looking at NFTs, like what are the intrinsic properties of this if we think of this as an art medium? And so, it was like, well, what if the easiest thing I had to, why would anybody buy a link to a JPEG, or the easiest response was, what if it wasn't just a link to a JPEG? What if the thing itself was actually on the chain, right? And then it's not like you're buying a title to the house. You're actually putting the house, like a very small, tiny house on the chain, right? Hashtag van life, right? And so the idea or the observation was, well, you could probably do some pixel art, some 8x8 pixel something or other, some kind of CryptoPunk type thing. But what became apparent to me is like, oh, code is just text, really, at one level of representation. And text is if you've ever opened Notepad and wrote a lot of stuff and hit save, that thing is a tiny file, right? Yeah. Like it's nothing. But if you open Photoshop and you add like a color to something, right, like and save it, depending on the resolution, it can be multiple megabytes, right? And so the idea was, what if I designed something which was code and it generated an image? That way I'm kind of like bypassing the size limits of the system and essentially allowing for a blueprint or sheet music to exist online. But the sheet music is not like the WAV file or the MP3 file, right? Like it's like the platonic representation of this thing itself, which is kind of more perfect than any performance of the thing, right? Like if you take a great piece of music and you go to like the New York Philharmonic, right, or London Symphony Orchestra, or whatever, like you're hearing a performance of that piece. But that is like, where does that piece of music exist? Probably the purest form is just being able to read the sheet music and like hear the notes the way musicians do, right? I'm not into music, right? But to be able to kind of create that performance in your head is probably more accurate in a way than any single performance, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I was trying to do. And I think I figured out a clever way of doing this. And it's basically this kind of a combinatorial study on all the different ways you can combine red, green, and blue under a simple set of rules together to create this set of images. And the important thing to me was it's like this kind of exhaustive color study on all the ways this can be done. And so it's not like a random sample of like there's 5,000 or there's 10,000. Like it literally goes from start to finish. It makes all 50 million of them and then basically filters it down using another set of rules to say, if you have two uncles, then you can't exist anymore. Throw you into the garbage bag, or right. What I'm saying is like if you think of the unsigned algorithms as kind of like a solution space of X and Y, I systematically sample from the regions in equal kind of things using this kind of gridded rule type approach that leaves 31,119 of them in the end, because I couldn't release 50 million, but I also didn't want to randomly pick 10,000 from them because I wanted this to be like an equal sample of the thing. So
For sure.
I wrote a bunch of other code to basically filter it down to something more manageable. And
Quick question,
they start very simple. Yeah.
If someone was to like run this code and it, you could actually produce all 50 million and see the order of it. What do you think like the spacing of that? So just imagine you had like a huge grid of, how big, the square root of 50 million, 20, 200 and something million maybe, or
a big number.
sorry, 200 and something thousand, whatever it is. Imagine a grid of all of them. Where do you think they would be located, the ones that actually made it through that process? How do you think that would actually look? Would there be like clusters of them, or would there just be like random ones?
It would be kind of, there would be kind of striations through it, because certain regions would be more highly culled than others because the rules would affect that region more. I'll give an example. Like there's basically a complexity budget in an unsig, right? You can either have a lot of different colors, which result in like this kind of rainbowy type effect happening.
Yeah.
Or you can have a lot of geometric form. You can either get complicated colors or you can get complicated forms. But it's kind of like the knee of an optimization problem, right? If you go too far in one direction, then you lose the other one. So the most complicated colors occur in like geometrically simplistic unsigs. And the most geometrically complicated unsigs have less complicated colors in them because there's basically like a budget, right?
Yeah.
Like how do you want to express yourself? And so what I'm trying to say is I could imagine, I like to say that it's like equally sampled, but it actually, what you've forced me to realize is it's not equally sampled, right? Like there is kind of tilt to it based on what I wanted to express and what I wanted to do with the work. It's not just like take every third unsig and release that into collection, right? The set of rules that I've done have actually kind of, I'd say, have imbued the work with a little bit more intentionality and more kind of direction based on what I was trying to do and explore.
For sure. I'm really interested
Thank you
how you came up with those rules as well. Like what was like the thought process going in your head? Was it, I'd really love to have 31,119 at the end of this? Or was it, more like this will produce this interesting sort of, form perhaps? Because there's so many different ways that you could have created these things.
So one way is to look at it through the lens of I knew I needed to get the number down, because just from like the practicalities of like an NFT release, already I got so much shit for having 31,000. Like, hey, dumbass, an NFT drop's supposed to be 10,000. Like, what are you doing?
Fuck those
right?
people.
And so, but there was times like I thought maybe this is going to be 100,000 or 200,000. But I often kind of think of it as like a doctor or surgeon removing a tumor. How much can I cut away from this and still keep its kind of like intrinsic properties without cutting into healthy tissue? Does that make sense? Right? And often people get confused. They think design is like adding color or adding logos and graphics to something. And I think a real designer will tell you design is like removing things until you can't remove anymore, right? Like what is quintessentially this thing, and make sure and fight with the marketing people or whoever to make sure they don't add in some superfluous extraneous kind of thing, that you have this kind of quintessential object that is the thing that you're trying to make, right? And it's not like a shower radio with a, butt cleaner and a loofah kind of all crammed in there. So one of the ideas that arrived pretty late in the thing was I realized because it's all red, green, and blue, if you've ever played in Photoshop, you know that there's like colors from 0 to 255, like you pick a red, a green, and a blue. What I realized was even though I was blending all these together, because they were going from 0 to 255 in all the cases, I would get like primary colors, secondary colors, maybe a tertiary color or two. But what I realized was I needed to have like a block that was being combined, which was not from 0 to 255, but from 0 to 128. Because that would be like a half strength red, a half strength green, a half strength blue. And if you mix, like half strength red with blue, you get a different color than full strength red and blue.
Yeah.
Right. And so this allowed like more kind of pastels and other kind of more complicated colors to come into this play. But it again like quadrupled the size of the collection. Right. And so one thing that I did, to just give a concrete example, is I tried as much as possible using some simple rules to eliminate rotational symmetry from the collection. Originally I thought it would be very cool to have these mandala unsigs, right? Like you have the same unsig,
like a
but
center,
it's like northeast. Yeah. And it's kind of rotated. But then I realized I had to make a choice. Do I want to include more complex colors in the collection? Or do I want to include this rotational symmetry, right? Where if there's like a northeast, a northwest, a southwest, and a southeast version of the same kind of unsig. And I made a choice that, like having more complex colors is more important than having the same thing 4 times in different directions. So as much as possible, I tried to remove, using like a simple set of rules, these other 3 variations. And so every kind of unsig exists primarily in like this northeast quadrant, you could say, right?
Yeah.
There's a few exceptions to that, but does that kind of make sense? Like, there's a choice. Like, given this kind of budget of how large a collection can be, what do I choose to focus on and include? For me, color was more important than the same form rotated 90, 180, 270 degrees, right?
I like that as well, because then it's, I suppose there's more of an emphasis on each individual one, because if you're creating it with that in mind,
it's not diluted, right? By like there's 3 other things exactly like this.
It would almost be like the center point of the art is not actually even the thing itself. It's like this black dot in the middle rather than what you've actually created. Everyone's obsessing over like, damn, that's a unique like collection or something, and the focal point is nothingness. That'd be kind of funny.
I mean, it's very interesting how the work does kind of like oscillate back and forth between individual unsigs as the focus and these kind of compositions that other people make, right? That is kind of a fun thing for me, but I think that's quite exciting actually, right? Like seeing what other people do with it and how they take it. And it to me, it's very kind of like, even though I hate the word like Web3 kind of thing, right? Like I've put something out there, and I think that this kind of a little bit of collaborative or back and forth, there's no back and forth. I put it out there and then they play with it. But it feels more kind of, I don't know, like appropriate for the medium, right? That like there's this kind of kit of parts that are out there and people can do what they want with them. And it kind of expresses something about how the internet and these kind of distributed systems work, right? That it is more kind of defocused on the original thing and then more about the kind of contextual relationships that people build.
Yeah, I'm much more interested when there's sort of it's almost like you don't really know what's going on. So like the when people have different motivations for something that might on the surface look sort of objectively the same. So like, oh, I'm going to buy an unsig, or I'm going to mint one if you were back there 6 months ago or however long ago it was when you were first doing it. And, for some people it would be, I want to create a collection. And then for others it can be, I want like a rare one or something. And then for others it could be, and I'd probably put myself more in this category, like I just want to, I want a pretty one. I like the colors. I just want, it doesn't need to be like a super deep thought type of thing like that, and you can still sort of see that with other NFTs if you look at them, where it's like everyone's going for the same thing. Like, I want the rarest one, and it's like, oh, okay, well, that doesn't, that's fine. People can do whatever the fuck they want, but that doesn't interest me.
It's really uninteresting to me. I absolutely hate this rarity thing because it's such a kind of artificial, arbitrary rarity, right? Like, there's almost literally like a spreadsheet somewhere that says what traits are rare.
Well, that's right? How they would create it, and that's how they rank it on a bunch of the ranking tools that you can find.
And that's like, so if like a pile of shit was the rarest trait in the collection, then everybody would want this pile of shit, right? Like, usually it's like a golden banana or like a clean one or whatever kind of thing. But like, it's the key and the value, like what it is, the trait and what it maps to, are totally, again, arbitrary. Like, it doesn't really matter, and people are mostly concerned with this like higher ranked item, right? So it's like, it's so like, I don't know, late stage capitalism kind of thing, like to make your artistic desire and what you want to have, like, to look at. First of all, like, people don't look at their NFTs, right? but if they were to have that be determined by this kind of very, I don't know, to me, it kind of makes me sick, right? Like, what is going on here? I've never been in an art gallery before and been like, that looks like the rarest one, right? Like, let's go for that one, right? Like, it's kind of like an abomination, I think, of like all that is good in the world. And
damn, throwing some shots out.
I kind of want to burn it with fire.
Beautiful. So. What you just said actually got me thinking about something else as well, which was what I kind of like about the unsigs as well is like you were saying, it's got that, it's almost like the story behind it. So it's not just a link. There is something to it. And the code's there, and if I wanted to, I could create it from scratch. Am I gonna? Probably not. But I like that aspect of the story to it, where there's just something a little bit more behind it. And I suppose that's how most and correct me if I'm wrong here, but like most art, it's about the story. I went to with my family not too long ago to the museum of some art museum in Canberra, and they had a Jackson Pollock there, which was first of all super surprising. It's like, how the hell did that end up in Canberra? Like no one comes to Canberra. Once again, my dad was just commenting. He's like, this thing here is just worth such an absurd amount of money, and it is just paint thrown on a canvas in one sense, but then it's the story behind it, and that's why there's always like a plaque or something which explains a little bit of details of
why you should care about this one.
Or maybe what makes it a little bit more unique than
there's some interesting stuff about Pollock. Like some people have done some analysis, like no matter what, one thing that I quite like is the idea that no matter if you crop a Pollock, you can't tell what scale it's at. Like you can't tell if you're looking at the whole painting or the piece of the painting, right? Because they're kind of scaleless. Like there's a kind of fractal repetition of the structure, which it's quite complicated to actually do, right? Like I would challenge anyone who says like my kid can do that. Have your kid throw paint at a canvas, or even you throw paint at a canvas. You will not be able to make something that is as kind of striking as a Pollock painting. Like you literally won't be able to do it. You can try, but you won't. And so like people kind of, what people should understand is like these kind of like modern conceptual artists are kind of a reaction to the strictures of like classical painting, perspectival, objective reality. And they're kind of responding to photography in a way. Photography comes out in 1900 and kind of like forces painting to redefine itself. It's like, well, what the fuck is the point of objectively recreating reality pictorially on a two-dimensional canvas if suddenly there's this machine which can do a much better job than I can at doing that, right? And so this is actually gets into the NFT discussion. I think these new art forms is like we think NFTs are a novel new thing, and in one level they are, but there are always new art forms. And like the dumbest thing you can think is that like we're in a unique time period. Like all humans do the same shit. Like we're on like page 3 of new art form right now.
Yeah.
Right. And like it's going through the motions, right? And that's not art. No, it is art. Like what can we do with it? And if you look at early photographs, a lot of the times there are mountains or buildings or landscapes because they don't move. And the technology was such that like you had to stay still for 8 minutes to take a photo because the film was so, if you know what an ISO is, like low sensitivity that like you had to have a very, very long exposure to take a subject. It's also why people didn't smile in early photographs because they had to hold that pose for minutes, in order for the photo to be captured, right? So like they basically are like locked into these like death grimace poses.
You see into their souls sort of thing,
to maintain for the duration required, right? With a flash bulb or whatever. But am I making sense there, right? Like new art forms, new technology creates new ways for humans to explore their existence. And that is something that occurs throughout history. And I think what's really cool about blockchains, I mentioned this when I was talking to this Chinese lady, Bullish Dumpling, but Chinese invented gunpowder, and they used it for mostly like cultural uses, other than Mulan, right? Making fireworks and this kind of thing, right? Like a kind of cultural festivity celebration. And it's not until gunpowder gets to like Europe and they're like, we can put a piece of metal in front of this, right? Yeah. And maybe part of that is because there's much more political rivalry in Europe because there's all these decentralized princes who are always like, how can I fuck over my brother or my cousins, right? And get a leg up over them. Whereas in China, kind of centralized. And so like new technology equals new ways of displaying cultural power and like, the mandate of heaven or whatever kind of thing, Tianming. And in Europe, it's like, how do I weaponize this? And so what I'm trying to say is that blockchain started in the economic domain of how to send currencies back and forth. But it's kind of what's interesting to me is like, it is kind of obvious. I didn't realize it till now. Like this also has cultural implications for how do we kind of structure and understand our existence as human beings, right? And artifact making is like one of the main things that humans do. Right? Is this? There's I think the Lascaux caves that Picasso goes to in France or something. Right? He's like, oh my God, we've learned nothing. He's looking at the paintings of bulls on the caves and this kind of thing, and it's just like humans do what humans do, and who's to say whether this painting on the wall is better or worse than this? Especially at his time, right? Artists were moving back towards this more rudimentary kind of cubist representations and more simplistic rather than objective reality. Like it's very kind of compelling, this kind of story to see.
For sure. And it's always, it almost always comes back to the stories. What's one of the reasons why Bitcoin takes off is because it's a fucking cool story. This
narrative,
mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto, and they create this thing, and then they disappear, and then there's still like wallets out there. That's it's amazing. I hope someone's making like a gangster movie of him, and he's like.
When you want to interview him, let me know. I'll call him up. He's my uncle. I'll get him on the show.
I was just imagining him as like Yukio Mishima or like a blending of like Yukio Mishima gets transported into the mid 2000s. What does he do? Mm-hmm. He's like, fuck it, I'm not gonna like storm a consulate or something. I'm gonna create a blockchain. It's just this ripped version of him.
That's an interesting observation. Yeah, I think that. I mean, it's quite weird talking to people about blockchain now. Like they don't seem to really understand that it's not about number goes up. Number goes up is like a side effect of this like based AF world changing technology that allows people to kind of have freedom. and as a result, the number goes up. But like they put the cart before the horse when they don't understand what blockchains are about and what they enable, and that is why the number goes up. If it's just a story, if it's just a narrative, you just have like, you could replace blockchains with penny stock Telegram groups, right? Buy this one, it's going up. We're going to pump it, and then we'll dump it, kind of thing. But
Yeah.
I tend to think this whole blockchain thing has really exposed me. I used to be a commie bastard, but like it's really made me think about like, what is the value of allocating capital, right? Because like there's people who came into unsigs very early on, and like they made really stupid choices in terms of like they spent all their life savings or something buying art. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, that's not a wise thing to do. And so then other people now, like, I don't know how familiar you are. There's these like unsig whales that own a large chunk of the collection. And other people are like, oh, they're bad for the thing, whatever. Da, da, da. But I'm like, one, like the collection wouldn't have sold out without these people who went, I'd say, much deeper than balls deep into the thing, right?
Yeah.
And like, I never had anything at risk in releasing unsigs other than my name and reputation, right? And the time that I put into making it. But there are people who put like $100,000 into buying some unknown artist. And I think that takes some kind of level of conviction and belief that I didn't have in the work. I liked what I did, but was I willing to, put that amount of not that I had that amount of capital, but if I had, I don't know that I would have put it into an unknown artist that I had never met on the other side of the world, who was releasing, this kind of conceptual art piece on Cardano. And so I get a bit defensive, and like, these people did something quite brave. And if I know that the project wouldn't have succeeded unless they had gotten involved, succeeded in terms of like, we would have been like many, many, many other projects from that time period that are just totally forgotten right now, right? Because they didn't sell out, they didn't mint out. And so what I always kind of talk about is that like releasing this NFT collection and releasing like an idea as an NFT collection on Cardano or any blockchain, like you kind of have an obligation to succeed, because if you don't succeed, then people will view that idea as invalid. You know what I mean? Like, oh, like that thing didn't make any sense. Like that was tried and it failed. So I felt a kind of large burden to try to make the project work and succeed. And I'm, like I said, I couldn't have done it. It wouldn't have succeeded if these people hadn't gotten involved and been interested in it. So I'm hugely grateful to the end, to everyone, not just them. But
yeah, and that's, and you could even argue like, that's the human nature, like how awful that there's always people who is gonna try and get more than maybe what they deserve, or than that's fair or something like that. But the more I read, like the more I just live life, the more I come to appreciate. It just happens with everything, you can look at like the galaxies and stars and stuff, and it's not like, oh man, it's unfair, there's only one sun around Earth.
Most of space is empty, 7. Right?
Yeah.
It's like most of existence is nothing, and there's these pockets of like noise that are kind of distributed in, right? And it's not just at this level of the universe, like the like classical model of an atom that everyone learns in grade school, or people used to learn, right? This like the nucleus and then the things, right? That's a sun with planets around it, right?
Yeah.
And most of an atom is nothing, right? And even within the nucleus, like most of the nucleus is nothing. Like there's little pockets of protons and neutrons, right, in there. Like most things are nothing, and things tend to clump and aggregate towards each other. And I would even, I'm not like fighting with you about this, like I wouldn't even say that they didn't deserve it or they got more than they deserve, kind of thing, because they literally paid for it, right? Like, and so like
you're not fighting with me on that. I'm 100% agreed.
and like the mint, I think a lot of people don't understand, like the mint was open for 2 months, right? Like it's not like an NFT collection now where like if you don't have your seed phrase ready and everything, your wallet transaction prepped and hitting refresh on the site. Oh shit, it sold out. I'm gone. Right. Like
yeah.
you were only limited by how much you were willing to put in. Right. And granted, not everyone came to that mint with equal amounts of capital ready to go. But there were, one of the guys who ended up with a couple hundred unsigs was an Uber driver who, like, it was such an insane story. I didn't understand like where he was driving these Ubers, because he like many people, he was buying an unsig every day as part of his like morning coffee. Like he'd go to the website, he'd open the thing and he'd send 58 in to get, an NFT back. And I'm like, where are you driving that an Uber driver can afford to spend this? But he did this every day, and he ended up with more unsigs than like 99.9999% of the world, right? And he did that, making personal choices and sacrifices to his daily life in what he was and wasn't buying, right? Because he chose to do this. And like, who is anyone to kind of take that away from him, right? Because probably you had more money than this Uber driver, right? And you didn't. So I just very, very hesitant to. It's forced me to kind of realize, this is what I mean: the value of allocating capital, especially at stages when the future is unknown, like taking on that uncertainty risk, like that actually should be rewarded. Because there's been other people, not so many, but who bought and then paper handed or sold on the way up, kind of thing, right? And so it's like, oh, what is happening there? You're basically saying, I don't believe in the future of this more than this other person who's buying in. Do you get what I'm saying, right? If I bought
it's always like
right?
For every buyer, there's a seller as well. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so it's like, it's really just like expressing intent or kind of level of belief in the thing, not to get like too religious or this kind of thing. But
I'd go even further and say it's about like future predictions. So it's about predicting the future. It's how good is your grasp of reality, in that you can somewhat map out maybe what will happen in the future, and these sort of decisions, they get made on every single aspect of your life. Like you can't escape it. You have to decide, like, am I going to eat healthy or bad today? Am I going to walk or am I going to run? Am I going to
cost benefit analysis, and do you want to pay the piper now or in the future, right?
Yeah.
And take on debt, and like I haven't been to a gym in like probably like 8 or 9 years, and when I was reading Mishima, like I was working out with the rugby team, I was getting swole. It was really awesome, because I now that I have time again, I want to get back to it now. COVID and everything is tapering off, but it's like,
I was going to say 4 kids can take that away as well.
I've done my exercise there 4 times, and what was the thing? But the idea is that like that Mishima had was that like there's this book I like. It's called Descartes' Error. It's written by a neuroscientist. It's Antonio Damasio, I think. And
I know that name. Yeah.
He talks about like this whole "I think, therefore I am," cogito ergo sum, is like the dumbest shit ever. Like, no, like you're in your body. You exist like as like there's this spinal cord, there's this brain. It's a bunch of nervous signals being sent, like muscular signals being sent from your body to your brain. Like your brain like will not have any function without a body. And so I think it kind of gets into this, what's very interesting. He does this observations based on people who have had physical brain injuries. Like I think there's Phineas Gage, this like steel rod shot through his brain, and like changed his personality, because he somehow didn't die, but he lost like the ability to perceive other people or something like that, right? Or to relate to other human beings, because certain brain functions are located in specific areas. So it's like it's like a kind of A/B testing. Like this is a quote normal brain, and this is this brain that doesn't have this thing. And so what he's kind of gone through is that no, like this is it's kind of like one of the fundamental axioms of human or of Western civilization. I think, therefore I am. Like this kind of individualistic kind of, you're up here in your brain and everything else doesn't matter, kind of matrix like, a brain in a tub full of electrical signals type thing. And what he is like, this is totally flawed. And that's when the Mishima thing came in. And I had, I was an undergrad student with no responsibilities. And like, I was like, oh, I can just live at the gym and lift weights with the rugby team. And it was awesome. But I what I found is that I wrote all my best papers while I would go on runs around the cemetery with this. I had a job running a American couple's German Shepherd. And we'd go on these, when I started the thing, I could like run 6 kilometers in 2 hours. Right. I was just like beat ass slow. And by the end, I was running like, 18, 20 kilometers in these like 2 hour things, maybe 3 hours, depending. And I just get into this kind of stream of consciousness mode where like my brain would kind of shut down. I'd get into this kind of flow state while running. And usually, like any college student, when I would go to write a paper, I would just stare at a blank screen for like an hour or two and just be like, where the fuck do I start this thing? Right. But what I found is this trick was I'd do all the reading. I'd have everything in my head. I'd go for this run. I'd write the paper from, A to Z. And then I'd just go down and I'd be typing. I wouldn't be writing because the ideas already existed in my head. And I already knew how to kind of construct. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. No.
And that was possible because I wasn't sitting at my desk late at night, trying, like, that's not a good way to think. And
for sure.
Being running, being involved in my physical meat shell is how I could think best. And I think that's a very common thing that almost anyone will tell you, right? It's like, ignore your body at your own peril. And definitely I say that having ignored my body for the past decade.
There's this, if you haven't read the Murakami book, What I Think About When I Think About Running, I think that's what it's called.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah, you might enjoy that. That's because he's a pretty avid marathon runner. So he's definitely got a lot of thoughts on related to like the relation between exercise and his works. So yeah, definitely, and yeah, anecdotal as well. But the time in my life when I felt the worst and I had probably the like worst thoughts in my head was when was it? It was like I'd played soccer for a year, but I'd busted my ankles a bunch of times, just rolled ankles.
Did you say soccer?
Soccer.
For me? Was that for me?
Or was that no. We say it here because we've got like 4 different types of football. So
yeah, okay.
You need to say soccer, otherwise no one gets it. Or it's like rugby or NFL or NRL or union.
Australian football.
Yeah. So no, not just for you, man.
Okay.
But I just had this like awful period where basically I started working in the mines for a bit, working underground. Was just not doing any exercise, and that was honestly like the worst. Probably one of the worst parts of my life in that period as a whole.
I used to be a depressed little, angsty high schooler in America because like I was always, like a more nerdy, brainy kind of person in the States. And so I think coming to Japan, I joke my high school in America, like they were state champions in baseball, football, soccer, swim team. Like I always joke, I was surrounded by like these Greek gods in the halls, and I was this tiny little like half Japanese kid, right? Like scrawny as fuck. And then going to Japan was like kind of like a coming out moment. Like, oh, I'm not shorter than everyone. I can compete in the domain of masculinity with these set of people, right? And so like. Not being, it's very kind of funny. It shows how like weak my personality was. But like, if I couldn't compete, I didn't want to, right? But now that I could compete, I thought, oh, like let's do this thing, right? And so it was quite, it was quite interesting. I used to be, like suicidal thoughts all the time, so depressed and this kind of thing, and like just that's why I always tell me like if you're depressed, just go to the fucking gym. Like it's very hard to be depressed after you've lifted some weights, right? Like your dopamine and everything in your brain, like it's just like such a good I'm not like Tom Cruising. No one should take antidepressants here, kind of thing. But like do that and sleep. One, if you have insomnia, do something that makes you tired. Right? Like, of course you have insomnia. Like you haven't done anything all day other than sit on your couch, right? You need to physically exhaust yourself. And that almost like just resets your kind of body as like a calibration, right? To a state which is more in tune with like how we're evolved to be. I think, running around on the Serengeti chasing gazelles and stuff like that.
Yeah, the weird thing is like what we do nowadays as well. Because I'm really into handstands. Like I love handstands, and it's such a useless thing, man. Like there's no, it's not good for anything else. Like like
the blood flowing to your head, does that like?
Oh
give
man,
you
I get
or?
No, that's fine. Like I get used. I'm used to it now. But it's sort of like if you're a runner, you could maybe be like, if that one day where maybe like the car breaks down, I really need to get to work, or you're a CrossFitter and it's like I could lift the tree off my kid or something, and I'm like, maybe if I get into like a tight space sometime, I could whip out a handstand and but it's such a useless skill. But it's like the point is like it brings me meaning and it's fun.
Did you see the Cardano video recently? I have it for you, and this is a total positive thing. There was a guy in a wheelchair who went to a club at some Cardano thing, and he walks on his hands through the dance floor and starts dancing while doing a handstand. So if you ever become a paraplegic, you can still go to the club and dance doing handstands, because you're basically training for this future where you might not have access to your legs. So
there's this.
I hope to God that never happens. Otherwise, this podcast will take a totally different kind of interpretation. You have to drive very safe from now on, okay?
Otherwise,
I'll feel like a horrible human being.
There's this great. There was I think a kid who did wrestling. I'm not sure what they call it in the US, just wrestling, I guess. The one where they
Greco,
that
they get
type.
sweaty and wear spandex and rub against each other.
The sexy one. And but he only had one leg, and basically like he grew up his whole life with crutches. And there's videos of the other sort of kids he was versing who were saying like he had the strongest grip strength ever. Like he'd grip your thigh and it would feel like a vice was just being put on it. And it's one of those ones where it's sort of like that you can even bring it back to like you were talking about with the art. It's sort of the restrictions are almost what made this kid be something more than he perhaps could have been, like or in this particular domain was like, wow, what was a limitation is now, it served him, and he became the best because of it.
Bjork, weird Icelandic or Swedish lady, wherever she's from, right? She had a boyfriend a long time ago. I don't know if they're still together. Matthew Barney. He's like a contemporary artist. And I was in San Francisco one time, and I saw I went at the MoMA, I think, his installation. Like he had this series. It was like drawing restraint number 7. And like what he does, he rappels down the side of the wall of the building, or like inside, with like a hand tied behind his back, and he like draws on the wall, and is like exploring the physical act of mark making under physical duress, or like very, but like it is kind of a faff, but it is that kind of stuck with me, especially when I learned more about architecture and design, is that like constraints are hugely freeing in terms of the design process. I don't know about the artistic process, but in design, like it's like, oh, I don't have to worry about that. Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Like I can now I know if you're looking at, for me, like talking about the paper, right? Staring at a blank canvas, there's nothing more intimidating than just like an empty canvas, stage, tape recording, whatever. Like how do you make that first mark onto the sheet, right? Where do I begin this thing? And so by having constraints, like this thing doesn't have color. Oh, it's black and white. Great. Okay, now I can focus. What can I do within this black and white thing? And it relates back to unsigs, right? Like that's something that I was kind of familiar with, having gone to this design education, is like working within constraints and using constraints to focus you, as opposed to feeling like you're in an S&M kind of thing, tied to the bed and you can't move your neck or your head and you have a ball tied in your mouth. Sorry. You get what I'm saying, right? Like those constraints are actually make the thing quite easier and possible to explore one direction rather than another.
For sure. Yeah. So speaking of this, so you've got like a version 2 that you've been working on. And you were talking about how you want to take it to the next level and incorporate elements of potentially it changing depending on like the state of the blockchain, or in relation to time where it's at, like how long since it's been minted or something like that. How would you add constraints? Because you're adding a whole lot more complexity on top of that, right?
So it's actually kind of changed. I think I know what you're talking about. In the early videos, like I think around the time of release, when I was interviewing a lot of people.
Yeah, I was watching a bunch of them. Yeah,
I was very interested in like making dynamic things, and that's still something that's kind of on the back plate. But actually, the way the project has developed, or my thinking has developed, it's basically kind of similar to what we were just talking about with this idea of a stage. Like any art piece has some kind of contextual place that it's located or performed, right? Like if you go to a theater, it's literally on this stage, right? Yep. And I think a lot of modern or contemporary art is like trying to I'll use a simpler reference, like Deadpool. The superpower of Deadpool is to break the fourth wall.
Yeah.
Right. Like he talks directly to his audience, and he gets out of the comic book, and he's this kind of like meta character that exists between the panels and this kind of thing. And so I think that is a very kind of like postmodern kind of thing for an artwork to be aware of where it is and to kind of like push up against its boundaries and make you aware of their boundaries. Right. So that's kind of the direction that not version 2, my next work, has moved in.
Yeah.
Is like interrogating, like what is an NFT, not from the perspective of a link to a JPEG, but like these things are all these like two-dimensional images primarily that are consumed on a screen. And so to kind of draw attention to like the planar nature of the screen, what it is, what it isn't, and kind of in a way like reach out from the screen in order to make the viewer kind of aware of what it is they're looking at. And in terms of constraints, I've kind of said that I would like this to not have any color, because I think some people misunderstand unsigs in a way. Like they're like, oh, it's like rainbow colors, and like, oh, Alex is a rainbow color guy. Not really. Like, no, it's not what, like it is. There are colors in it, but to say that it's like it's only color, or it's even like about color, would be kind of missing like 2/3 of the other parts of the project. And so what I kind of view, it's kind of this Matthew Barney thing, is like if I can eliminate color from this and still make this kind of artwork on chain in NFTs, I think that will force like some people to be kind of shocked and be like, what? Like the color guy, the gradients, like this is that guy, because this doesn't look anything like it. And what people should understand, I think, is that art is not really about style. Like I think so many people in the NFT space confuse illustration for art. And this is not a diss. Like I have real life friends who are professional illustrators, but an illustrator, someone who like draws little cartoons for like the New Yorker magazine, or like these little, like, what I'm talking about, these little
the tiny little panels. Yeah.
They often are creative people who in their spare time can make art or have artistic pursuits. But illustration of that kind, like it's not art, it's illustration. It's a tool. It's a tool making, like you're making this thing which is for commerce or this other kind of consumption. And it's not really, most of my illustrator friends would not have any issue with saying that illustration is not art when practiced in this way. And so like what I'm trying to say is like when you have, what am I trying to say? When you have all these kind of artists, or the best art is like some dude on Fiverr, drawing a bunch of animals and traits to be randomly smashed together. Like, it's just has nothing to do with art, right? And people confuse like the ability to it's really simplistic. It's like we're almost back to like pre-1900s picture making. Like, oh, if you can make something that looks like a monkey, that's good art.
Yeah.
And that's not like, art has not been about that for the past like 150 years or so, right? It has nothing to do with like, just because most Americans and a lot of Western education, like they think that art, like illustration or drawing, is a talent that people are innately born with. That's not an idea that exists in Japan. I don't know if you're aware of this, but like everyone can draw in Japan. Yeah. Everyone can draw like anime style stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
Because like it's just like that's how people are taught like how to do this, and like they do it. And like if you look at any like high school kid's notebook, there'll be little anime style big eye face drawing. Like that's just something that anyone can do, because people don't think that like being able to draw is like this kind of artistic ability of genius or something. Like it's just like, no, it's just like you spend a little bit of time, you can learn how to do that. It's just like, I don't know, fixing air conditioners or something like that. Not to.
I was going to say like the Australian equivalent might be shit talking.
It's an art form that everyone can do, right? Or a skill. It's a craft, right? The difference between like is it Ruskin, like the arts and craft movement of the UK, and like 100, 200 years ago, like to bring all these kind of as like a resistance against the Industrial Revolution, to bring more like homely and folksy kind of stuff back into life, like all these floral prints and innate carvings of wood kind of thing.
The gnome sort of things as well.
Yeah. But art and craft are related but different things, and it's kind of just funny to me. So the whole point was to get to really kind of force people to realize that what I'm doing is not about color. It's not about, I sometimes get into these fights on Twitter, like, oh, I don't like how unsigs look. I'm like, well, great, but it's not really about what they look like. He's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I think art is kind of about like what the reaction it provokes between your ears, like in your head, and what do you think about, what does it map onto? You were talking about stories and narrative.
Yeah.
I think in one way that's kind of pointing to, it's like, what is this kind of pulling in and referencing, and what is contained within this thing, even though it's not in this thing, right? That's kind of what I think you mean by story, or what could be meant by story in a way. It's like, how was this created? Why was this created? And, what is it a response to? All this kind of stuff that's kind of like in the art. My pushback would be, I think a lot of contemporary artists get like in this very navel gazing, shoegazing mode. Like, this is my bed that's unmade, that has like the condom from when I lost my virginity.
Okay, yeah. Going too deep into the story. Most people's stories are shit.
Yeah, and like that's like, it's like, okay, and they put this like in the Tate Modern Museum, like this is art, and we're supposed to like, ooh, deep, interesting.
Yeah,
what does this mean? But I think that they're like the visual or the oral or whatever kind of component of art, the physiological perceptions, like they have to be interesting enough that someone wants to know, why was this made, right? Like it has to provoke a kind of question in their head that they want to peel back the covers and understand, what is this thing? Because if it doesn't, then you just have this like navel gazing, this is very important to me, I think you should consider your environmental impact on the world. And
yeah, I like that mix of getting back to Mishima again. That sort of mix of someone who's maybe thought deeply, and they've got an intriguing or compelling story or a vision, or they're able to explain things really well. But then they actually just do it. That's kind of what we're all about here on the Mere Mortals. It's just. There's a lot of talk on a lot of things, and yes, ironic coming from a podcaster.
I will give you the revealing my commie bastard tendencies. I think it's a Karl Marx quote. It could be misattributed. Philosophy is to the real world as masturbation is to sex.
Yep.
Right?
I'd agree with that. I've made like an effort this last year to actually read some philosophy books. To masturbate a lot, yes. No, I've been intrigued by philosophical ideas for a long time, especially sort of the Stoic type meditation.
Stoicism is on a boom, right? All my friends are like Stoic. Yeah. It's like, I think Jordan Peterson is like the intro, entry drug, and then Stoicism is like level 2.
Ryan Holiday's all up in that biz as well. So But I was like, all right, I'm going to actually try reading some of this stuff. So, I got some Nietzsche and Heidegger, Reasons and Persons, which is like a modern one. And goddamn, man, I'm pretty unimpressed. Has been my general takeaway. It's just a lot of it, just felt like talk. It was like I can't really use this for anything.
Thus Spake Zarathustra in undergrad.
Oh yeah,
and I didn't really get it, but I read it. I read the intro again, and it's actually much more compelling because I think a lot of things I didn't understand. Funnily, Zarathustra, or this kind of prophet guy, like he has all the wisdom, or whatever. He goes into the mountains, and then it's so funny. It's in the first chapter, and I was just reading like a 3 or 4 page excerpt from the thing. He goes into town and he's like trying to tell people or warn people about like the reality of existence, and like kind of like a messiah figure, right? To shape them back up. But like he passes like into town, and as he's passing into the town, there's a crowd of people, and he starts talking to them. And apparently, like this is what I didn't get when the first time I heard, like the crowd was waiting for like an acrobat to perform. Right, like a juggler or something, and so like they think that he is this juggler, and like they're upset with him, like you're not giving us a good show, and there's like this archetype that like society hates a prophet, right? Like it only after they're dead does anyone like listen to them or kind of thing. But I kind of felt like this is a pretty interesting insight, right? Like the kind of meta narrative of like being a philosopher or thinking deeply about things is that like people want their like their cake and gladiator games to kind of go on, and just to be like entertained at this very superficial level of like a person juggling something in front of them, right? And there's this kind of miscommunication between the crowd and Zarathustra, who's trying to give like this philosophical lecture to the crowd, and there's just like the meta-ness of this, like it was totally lost on me. Like, oh, like he's saying like this is like what it's like trying to communicate truth to people. Like I guess that's kind of obvious now. I don't know how it passed on me, but like I was waiting for like the philosophical text to start, right? About
the base layer reality, or like here's how you can change your life, and 12 easy steps,
and how to conduct yourself, and what is the kind of thing. But like this kind of thing is actually quite an interesting kind of it wasn't interesting enough that I finished the book again, but it was like, wow, like was I really so blind as to miss like the allegory or the frame story here about like what does it mean to like ask questions and try to share thinking about those questions with other people who really have like no fucking interest in. I always say that in the context of unsigs especially, like it's like Marvel versus the museum, right? Like I read comics growing up, and I liked the Age of Apocalypse and Onslaught. It probably means nothing to most people, but like of the Marvel comic book universe, right? These were like 2 narrative arcs that happened. Yeah. But like so many people go to see the Avengers movies, right? And like nobody goes to museums. And but there's a very different kind of people who are like the kind of people who are interested in going to museums. I guess you could say it's like haughty-toddy, like looking down their nose at the plebes or whatever kind of thing. But there is something about like trying to interrogate and understand reality, which is not really a normal thing to do, I feel, right? Like most of us are just trying to hack it through life. and just like get on to the next day and make the rent payment. And it is a luxury and it is a privilege to be able to do that.
Yeah, and it can also be a huge downside. Like the one thing I'm good at is introspection. Like that's something I'm really good at, and it can be a real bitch sometimes because that's a constantly questioning yourself and why things are the way they are, and like how your interactions maybe affect other people. It's like exhausting, man. It's just fucking like, oh man, I wish I was just stupider.
That's why you should just lift some heavy weights and feel good about yourself.
And that's why I spend so much time upside down handstanding, man. I'm hoping the blood will just pool in my brain and I'll cut off some circuits.
You don't have to comment on it, but like I want to know what it's like to rub one out while doing a handstand. I think like that would be such like the blood flowing in two opposite directions. if you were to choke yourself while doing it, that would probably just be like the ultimate orgasm.
I'd just turn into a black hole or something. Yeah, no, man, I was saying the other day, like, I'm getting to the point where I can do some like, I'm solid enough that I can not think about having to think about balancing.
Yeah.
And I've been doing a bit of salsa lately, and I was like, man, maybe I could combine dance, like salsa dancing with handstands. And
that's like the most underwater basket weaving shit I've ever heard.
Oh yeah. It's
I kind of
like
feel
I said, it's totally useless.
You need to drive your opal off of a cliff or something and become a paraplegic to fully take advantage of your superpower. Right?
Oh yeah, man. It won't be until that happens where the true Kyrin will emerge, and it'll Kyrin
Super Saiyan.
Yeah.
Go.
It was funny you were talking about the second bite of the cherry though of philosophy. I hope that's the same for me, because the Tao Te Ching, for example, I read that in my early 20s. And then it's not until recently where I came back to it and went, oh, okay, yeah, this is way better than the first time I read it was just absolute trash, and now it's like, okay, this is good.
I didn't read the Tao in the past, but there was this text, I think it's by this guy called Wingsit Chan, and it was like Chinese philosophy. It's like I took a course in undergrad on it. It was like 1,500 pages. I went through like legalism, Confucianism, Daoism was my favorite part, and Buddhism is Zen Buddhism, and like it's just I'll try to find a passage if I can. The book is in a shipping container being moved to Portugal, but there's this constant thing where like the Zen Buddhist master is like telling his students to come grab his stick from him.
Yeah.
Right?
I know this one.
And he's like, come get it. They're like, no, last time you beat me. He's like, no, come get it. And beat me with it, right? To get your revenge. And they go up and then he just like wails on him again. And it's like, what is this? But it's something about like shocking the system into like nirvana or satori, or this kind of like, realizing the lie that is existence, right? And these kind of very sudden, I'd call them like moments of acceleration or deceleration. I used to argue with my ex-wife, maybe why she's my ex-wife, but like
that's probably an indication.
Pulling away from a stop sign, she would say, "Stop going so fast," and I would say, "I'm not going fast. I'm accelerating fast." Or I'm accelerating, but I would not break the speed limit, or I'd go 5 over or whatever, right? But what she didn't like was the acceleration. And what I didn't like was her sloppiness with language. And so you get what I'm saying there, right? Like why I'm talking about that in the context of these koans is like human beings are very bad at perceiving speed or movement, right? Like we like if you're flying along in a aluminium tube, 2 kilometers above the world, and you're just like, going 800 kilometers an hour, like you don't feel anything.
Yeah.
Right. Because like humans feel acceleration. They don't feel speed. And so what I think koans are about, these kind of like beating the thing, is like induced kind of jerkiness of movement that kind of like almost tears you out of existence and makes you realize. Do you get what I'm saying? Where I'm going with this kind of like it's that jerk of discontinuity. If if you calculus and engineering, this kind of thing, like this sudden like inflection point, that is like a moment of, I think, likely what's going on there is the ability to kind of almost like, I don't believe in a spirit or a soul necessarily, but like shock that kind of thing that out of the shell and make you kind of look back in on yourself. And I think that's kind of an interesting.
I always seek out paradox in many ways, which incidentally is why I really like Hosky. It's so like the difference between like what they say and how they act, I find just absolutely brilliant. But there's this thing from the Tao Te Ching, which is the master who does nothing leaves nothing undone, and I really like that aspect of it's sort of like both things, and you got to try and keep both of them in your head at the same time, because like if you go one way or the other, like it doesn't really matter which way, up or down, left or right. It's almost like the act of going in that way is sort of the downfall of it. You've gone too far already. And now you can't use this for everything. Like it's good to have some principles and some moral stands on things, but I do try and remember, whenever I see like religious fervor or Bitcoin maximalism or someone who's just got like this 100% concrete view of something, I just try and remind myself of like the paradox of life and of just things can be both things, and that's okay. Like it doesn't need to be something.
Or to be like real Taoist or Zen Buddhist, like things are nothing. Like everything is a lie. Nothing exists. A beautiful woman is just like a bag of leather and blood.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like what is this thing? Right. And like I was quite taken with this idea before what was it in physics? Like there's no real delineation between me and you. Like if you zoom in at a certain level, like it's just electrons and protons, right? And if you were to like look at a electron microscope with me, and I was to like shake your hand,
like
there would be no like boundary, right? Of like
exactly,
where you and I like, and even like between me and the air, right? Like the molecules slightly change, but I really kind of feel that this is really cliche, but like we are like the universe becoming aware of its existence, right? Like perceiving itself, and we're like little like perceptrons peeking out of this whole thing milieu and kind of like observing, right? And taking it in, and there will be this kind of like, but to me, like the idea that objective reality exists, or this kind of naive realism, like there's a table in front of me and I'm clicking a keyboard right now, like that's kind of like there's no way that's real. I'll give you an example of this. I used to be late all the time to my friends.
Oh, no, you didn't. Yeah, and would you say this?
And I would be like, I'm like, no. I say like, you don't even exist. Like, how can I be mad that like you're a figment of my imagination?
It's not even that time is relative. You just straight up don't exist.
Yeah.
Nice.
Like, and so like that's the kind of asshole that I was in undergrad. Like,
and you know what? The funny thing is that probably works better than saying time's relative, because when you say that, they're just like, oh, you're a pretentious ass. Like you think whatever. And when you say like, no, you don't exist, they're just like, you're fucking
prove
crazy.
To me that you exist. Like I don't know that like this isn't happening right now. Like I have no and what does it matter? Like if this happens or this doesn't happen, or there's a lot of I don't know. I don't think I live my life that way anymore. Probably I am a more productive member of society who can pay taxes and stuff like that. It was nice.
I call it like I mentioned with the handstands, almost like making myself stupid. When I used to overthink, I found like the best thing for this was it's like sort of somehow finding a way to be like overthinking is not helping here. So like, all right, I need to draw back and make myself stupider. And I almost like revel in the idiocy nowadays. Like if I do something just completely stupid, like the other day, I smashed my head into the sun visor part of my car, and it fell out. It's like just the most idiotic thing. I don't even know how I managed to do it. And it was just like, all right, this is a learning moment. This is a good moment to practice some Zen or some Tao, or to just appreciate Okay.
I think there was around the part where I started to fall out of the whole philosophy thing. But like I used to like a lot of my identity was bound up in like knowing small indie bands before my friends did, you know, and like
Okay. Yeah.
different EDM thing, you know, like oh I'm so cool and so hardcore. And then like I got really tired of the whole scene, and then I decided this was like in 2003 or four, I think. I was like, I'm going to listen to Paris Hilton and Britney Spears, like, and Madonna. I'm just going to have a fun time. And like, it was like kind of like normcore before normcore was a thing. Like, you know, like this would be like the most boring and just like poppy kind of thing. And it was like, oh wow, this is so like, I felt like the most brave thing you could do was like listen to shitty music back then, right? Because like everyone was so like building up these identities around the bands they listened to and all that kind of stuff. And so like just to like totally opt out of that value system and to intentionally go to this like mainstream banal thing was like the most shocking thing that you could do. And so that's why I had to do it. That was one part of it. And then I forgot the second part to tie this in. I'm sorry, but maybe that was the end of the story.
It was getting away from philosophy. Yeah, well, just from my experience, I can say like I won't be reading many more philosophical books in the in the near future. I think I'm due for some sci-fi.
Have you read Camus? I don't know. You might have seen me talk about it a few times.
I read not too long ago. What was it called?
The Myth of Sisyphus. Or The Stranger.
I read that one. What one was it?
The Myth of Sisyphus is like the philosophical text, and The Stranger is the I love The Myth of Sisyphus, and like I think that's peak philosophy. Like I think the opening of that book is something like there is only one philosophical question, and that is the question of suicide.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
I remember talking about that in my book review. Yeah.
Do you do it or not? Like everything else is bullshit, and I kind of agree with that.
That's such a strong statement as well. Like a starting to a book doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah, and like that's what I was waiting for in like the Zarathustra kind of thing. Is like, what is it you're going to be talking about, right? This is a philosophy book, but what I actually like how Camus did that. Like The Stranger, the way I explain it to most of my friends, The Stranger is like a literary tale that is kind of the philosophy of the Myth of Sisyphus in narrative form. Whereas the Myth of Sisyphus is kind of like the distilled, unadulterated, like pure thing, right? And that book actually gave me my answer. Like, no, I don't need to kill myself because, and I think absurdism is I don't know if it's linked to Stoicism or not, but I view it as sufficient for my kind of personal value. Like, life is meaningless. The reason it's called the Myth of Sisyphus, for anyone who doesn't know, Sisyphus is like some Greek dude, you know, god, demigod, who I think, not like Prometheus, something like that. I think he gave fire to man.
No, that was Prometheus. Sisyphus was just I think he was just like a total asshole in many ways and kept like defying death. Tricking the gods, coming back, you know, having sex with his wife, that sort of thing. So they were like, fuck this dude.
Based individual. Yeah. So his punishment is he has to roll a big giant stone up a hill every day. At the end of the day, it rolls back down, and the next day he has to repeat this just for all eternity, right? Is rolling a ball up the hill. And so Camus' point is that like life is meaningless. But like accepting that, realizing that, and choosing to roll the ball back up in the hill anyway is like a real like act of bravery to continue on. And I think that made so much sense to me. Like, yes, even though it's meaningless, even though my friend doesn't exist and I'm not late because none of this is happening, it's not to go through the motions, but to like intentionally continue to exist. And to like fight in a way against that, or to exist in a way against that, in spite of that, that to me was quite a kind of Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump, you know, do your worst to the storm, you know what I'm talking kind of thing. Like, is this all you got? Like, you know, and I think that was quite a. Do you get why I've never gotten into Stoicism, but I think there's something linked there about like. Not a stiff upper lip or continuing on and bearing it. Like that seems to be like a similar kind of overlap or core.
They use many methods of of showing why this current moment or whatever you think is bothering you right now really is meaningless. So in that sort of sense, yes. But it's probably a bit more, definitely more practical than absurdism, where it's like, okay, you're thinking this way, like change these thoughts and do this differently, and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, in many different ways. There's a link. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I do like both of them. Another good one is The Trial by Kafka. If you haven't read that,
Metamorphosis.
I haven't read Metamorphosis yet, but that's on my to read list. Dude, it's starting to get late. Okay. There's so many other more things I wanted to ask about, particularly related to travel.
Part 2 should be in Brisbane or Canberra, or if you get over to Portugal, we can do like a live taping someplace on a patio with some beer, and that would be awesome.
I'd love that. I need to get to Spain someday. That's my like.
I recommend Portugal. I think if
I'm going to Spain, I'd go to Portugal as well. It's right next to it.
But I mean, just in terms of crypto regulations, at least for the next couple of years, I think it makes more sense to be here.
It's all right, man. I've got tons of losses that I can just lock in here. I won't be needing to move for a while yet.
Never know with crypto, right? So I had to sell a bunch yesterday, so I'm sure the bottom is in, and we're going back up right now. So.
Yeah.
This was a very fun talk with a crypto person about not crypto things. So thank you, Kyrin, for doing that.
Hey, my pleasure, man. My pleasure for thanks for so much of your time. Very generous of you. If people are just interested at all of knowing more about you or Unsigned Algorithms, where would you direct them to?
I'd go to unsigs.com, see the website, probably go to Twitter at unsigned_ALGO, and there's a few links. The Discord is good. If you pop into the Discord, which is linked in the Twitter bio and I think on the website, you can ask some questions and get pointed in the direction of some different YouTube interviews and stuff like that.
For sure.
But yeah.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Awesome. Once again, thanks so much for your time. And we'll do this again.